Imagine a place where beauty and horror coexisted, a hidden camp surrounded by forest and a shimmering lake. On the surface, peace and nature, but behind the walls, terror, cruelty, and the slow extermination of tens of thousands of women. This is the story of Ravensbrück, the only Nazi concentration camp built specifically for women, a place few outside survivors ever truly knew, a place that Himmler himself visited, sometimes just to demand more vegetables in the soup, or to complain that the killing wasn't fast enough. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not just history, it's a story of survival, resistance, and voices that almost disappeared forever. February 2006. Heavy snow is falling near Berlin. Author Sarah Helm drives north, heading toward Ravensbrück. The roads are treacherous, a lorry jackknifed ahead. Yet she presses on. Decades earlier, Heinrich Himmler himself would take this same route, dropping by the camp, issuing new orders with chilling casualness. One day demanding faster exterminations, another deciding how prisoners should be fed. Ravensbrück was hidden away, by design. Himmler preferred his camps in areas of natural beauty, by the lake, surrounded by forest, out of sight, out of mind. But what went on inside was anything but invisible to the women who entered its gates. Over 130,000 women were imprisoned here. They came from across Europe, resistance fighters, political prisoners, Jehovah's Witnesses, so-called criminals, and yes, Jews too, though Ravensbrück was not formally a Jewish camp. For most, this place became the last chapter of their lives. But how did this camp come into existence? Who was the woman who first walked through its gates, and what kind of person does it take to oversee such a place? Early May, 1939. A convoy of trucks emerges from the forest, wheels sinking in the wet sand by the lakeshore. From one truck steps a woman in a grey uniform, brown wavy hair, stocky build. She pulls her boots free from the mud, straightens herself, and strides toward the towering gates of the brand-new camp. Her name is Johanna Langerfeld. She is to be the Oberaufseherin, the chief female guard. Ravensbrück is nearly complete. Barracks in strict formation, a square the size of a football pitch, striped prisoner clothing stacked in piles, showers ready, laundry machines humming and loudspeakers looming over the empty yard. This camp is designed with precision, to control, to observe, to dehumanize. No watchtowers were needed. The women would be made visible at all times. But who was Johanna Langerfeld before she put on the SS uniform? And how does a devout Protestant girl, raised with prayer and obedience, become the first overseer of a women's concentration camp? Johanna Langerfeld was born in 1900 in a small Ruhr town. The daughter of a blacksmith, raised in strict Lutheran tradition, prayer, thrift, and obedience were the cornerstones of her childhood. Like many girls of her generation, her destiny was supposed to be simple: Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church. But Johanna wanted more. From an early age, she dreamed of something greater, of serving a higher cause. At church, her family would recall Germany's humiliation under Napoleon, praying for the nation's revival. She idolized female heroines who disguised themselves as men to fight for Germany's freedom. When World War I erupted, young Johanna cheered as boys marched to war. But women were left behind, their role invisible. 2 years later, the war machine demanded their labor. Women went into factories, mines, and offices, proving they could take on men's roles. Yet, when the soldiers returned, those same women were pushed back into the shadows. For Johanna, life became a struggle. Her husband, a miner, died young of lung disease. She was left a single mother, relying on aid groups. Poverty pressed heavily. And yet, instead of collapsing, she turned to faith and work, teaching fallen women and the unemployed how to live disciplined lives. But discipline was only the beginning of Johanna's journey. In 1933, she found a new savior, Adolf Hitler. How does a woman, once dedicated to helping the poor, become an enforcer of the Nazi state? The answer lies in Hitler's vision for women, and in Johanna's hunger for order and belonging. Hitler's message to German women was clear. Your role is at home, to obey your husband, and to raise as many Aryan children as possible. Women were denied higher education, stripped of political rights, and removed from many jobs. And yet, For many women, Hitler represented something seductive, a strong man who promised to restore Germany's pride. Crowds of women packed rallies, their faces turned upward, glowing with adoration. They weren't just spectators. Many became active supporters. Johanna Langerfeld was among them. She cast her vote for Hitler, grateful for the stability his regime offered. For the first time, she had secure work in the prison system. She believed she could bring discipline, prayer, and order to women she considered wayward. But the regime demanded more than discipline. In 1933, the Nazis passed the Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily Diseased Offspring. Mass sterilization became law. Tens of thousands were targeted: the sick, the poor, prostitutes, anyone deemed unfit. Langerfeld witnessed this firsthand at Brauweiler, a workhouse for women. Officials declared that 95% of its inmates should be sterilized. She resisted, objecting to the brutality. For this, she was dismissed. Yet, her dismissal did not mark the end. Instead, it opened the path to something far darker: the concentration camp system. Dismissed for refusing one cruelty, Langerfeld would soon preside over another far worse. How did she go from protest to power, from prison worker to the chief guard of Ravensbrück? Spring 1939, a sleepy village north of Berlin. By the lake of Fürstenberg, trees whisper in the wind, the water glimmers. The perfect place, Himmler believed, to build a new kind of prison, hidden yet beautiful. But this was no ordinary prison. It was to be the first and only concentration camp built specifically for women. A camp designed not only to punish, but to control every breath, every movement, every thought. Construction crews worked tirelessly. Barracks rose in strict military rows. Workshops were readied for forced labor. Loudspeakers were mounted to bark orders. Even the parade square was designed with precision, a vast open space where hundreds of women could be lined up, counted, and disciplined under the watchful eyes of their guards. By May, everything was nearly ready. And so, a woman stepped through the gates: Johanna Langerfeld, the newly appointed Oberaufseherin. For Johanna, Ravensbrück was more than a job. It was destiny. Here, at last, she could shape women the way she believed they should be shaped: obedient, disciplined, and controlled. She oversaw the smallest details: uniforms pressed, boots shined, beds perfectly aligned. The prisoners, she believed, were not women to be pitied, but clay to be molded or broken. The SS architects gave her everything she needed: strict surveillance, barracks with no privacy, workshops where women could be forced into endless labor. Langerfeld enforced it all with pride. Soon, prisoners began to arrive. Women taken for political opposition, for resistance, for crimes as small as listening to foreign radio, or for simply not fitting the Nazi image of an ideal woman. They were stripped of their belongings, their identities replaced by numbers, their hair cut, their uniforms issued. Ravensbrück had come alive, and Langerfeld was at its heart. But what kind of place was Ravensbrück truly? What did the women endure in their first days behind its gates? And how did Langerfeld's vision of discipline turn into something far more monstrous? The gates slam shut. The women who enter Ravensbrück find themselves stripped of everything: their names, their clothes, their dignity. They are issued rough grey uniforms, clumsy wooden clogs, and a number stitched crudely onto their chest. Their hair is cut short. Their belongings vanish into piles, never to be returned. Every day begins before dawn, with the shrill blast of a whistle. The women must rush out into the cold, lined up in perfect rows on the parade square. For hours they stand, silent and still, while guards patrol with whips and dogs. Breakfast is a thin slice of bread. Lunch, a watery soup. Dinner, sometimes nothing at all. Hunger gnaws at them constantly. Many are forced to eat grass or peelings from the kitchen waste, just to survive. Then comes the work: endless, exhausting labor. Sewing uniforms for the Wehrmacht, weaving, repairing, building, all under brutal conditions. Anyone who falters is beaten. Anyone who resists disappears. At night they collapse onto straw mattresses in overcrowded barracks. The stench of sweat, illness, and fear hangs heavy in the air. Privacy is gone. Hope feels far away. But who were these women? They came from all over Europe. and each carried a story, stories of courage, resistance, and sacrifice, and some would become symbols of defiance inside Ravensbrück itself. Among the prisoners were women from every corner of Europe, Polish resistance fighters who had carried secret messages under the noses of the Gestapo, French students who had joined underground networks, German women who dared to speak out against Hitler, even Jehovah's Witnesses imprisoned simply for refusing to salute or serve in the army. One prisoner was a young Polish nurse, arrested for helping Jews escape the Warsaw Ghetto. Another, a French mother of 3, captured for distributing leaflets calling for resistance. There were aristocrats and factory workers, students and grandmothers. Each arrived with their own past, but inside Ravensbrück they became one thing, numbers in Langefeld's system. And yet, despite the camp's design to crush their spirit, many women found ways to resist. They whispered prayers, they passed secret notes, they stole scraps of food to keep others alive. Small acts, invisible to the SS but vital to survival. But how long could they endure? And as the war deepened, what new horrors would Himmler and his guards unleash inside the walls of Ravensbrück? As the war raged on, Ravensbrück swelled far beyond its original size. By 1942, thousands of women poured through its gates, prisoners from more than 20 nations, their faces marked by fear, hunger, and exhaustion. The camp became a factory of suffering. Himmler demanded efficiency, more work, fewer resources, harsher punishments. Barracks grew overcrowded, disease spread like wildfire, and death became routine. The women were forced into grueling labor, sewing, weaving, repairing uniforms, and later building weapons for Germany's war machine. Their bodies grew weaker, but the demands only grew harsher. The camp was no longer just a prison, it had become a tool of extermination, but Ravensbrück was about to descend into even darker depths. What came next would scar the women forever and leave a record of cruelty that still shocks the world today. In 1942, Ravensbrück became a testing ground for Nazi medicine. Doctors arrived not to heal but to experiment. Their victims were young Polish women, many of them resistance fighters. The SS called them Kaninchen, rabbits. Their legs were deliberately cut open. Glass, dirt, or even wood was pushed into the wounds to simulate battlefield injuries. Others were injected with deadly bacteria. The goal, to test new drugs and surgical methods. The pain was beyond imagination. Some women screamed through the night. Some never walked again. Others were carried to the crematorium. But the so-called rabbits did something unexpected. They resisted. They documented their wounds, smuggled out notes, and swore that one day the world would know what had been done to them. Even as their bodies were broken, their spirit remained unshaken. And while the doctors carried out their experiments, the woman at the center of Ravensbrück, Johanna Langefeld, faced her own battle, torn between doubt and duty, obedience and conscience. Johanna Langefeld, the Oberaufseherin of Ravensbrück, enforced order with an iron hand. She demanded strict discipline from the women, barking commands during roll calls, punishing resistance, and ensuring that Himmler's rules were followed. And yet, beneath her rigid posture, something stirred. Unlike many of her colleagues, Langefeld was deeply religious. She prayed often, clung to her Protestant values, and sometimes seemed disturbed by the cruelty unfolding around her. Prisoners whispered that she could be less brutal than other guards. Some remembered her secretly helping women or turning a blind eye when small acts of defiance occurred. Others recalled her tears in moments of weakness. But mercy in Ravensbrück was fleeting. Whatever doubts she carried, Langefeld remained part of the system. She wore the SS uniform. She stood beside the men who designed death. She made the camp run efficiently, ensuring that thousands of women were crushed under its weight. Her conflict was never enough to stop her, and in the eyes of history, it bound her forever to Ravensbrück's crimes. As the war dragged on, Himmler demanded more than just discipline. He wanted Ravensbrück to serve not only as a prison, but as a machine of death. By 1944, Ravensbrück had transformed into something far darker. The camp was no longer just a place of forced labor, it had become a central part of the Nazi killing machine. Starvation and disease took lives daily. Women collapsed at work, their thin frames unable to endure another hour of sewing, weaving, or hauling heavy loads. Punishments grew harsher. Beatings, hangings, and executions carried out in full view of the prisoners, designed to break their spirit. Then came the transports. Trains rolled in and out, carrying women to Auschwitz, Majdanek, and other camps where gas chambers waited. For those who remained, Ravensbrück itself became a place of extermination. A crematorium was built inside the camp. Black smoke rose above the trees. The sweet, sickening smell of burning flesh clung to the air. It was impossible to escape, an unspoken reminder that survival was a fragile thread. And through it all, Himmler demanded more efficiency, more bodies, more death. But even in the face of this terror, the women of Ravensbrück found ways to fight back. Resistance lived, even in the shadows of the crematorium. Even in the darkest corners of Ravensbrück, defiance refused to die. Among the prisoners were doctors, teachers, nurses, women who understood that survival alone wasn't enough. They organized secret networks, smuggled food, and passed coded messages between barracks. The rabbits, the Polish women tortured in medical experiments, became symbols of courage. The others hid them, nursed them, and spread word of their suffering to the outside world. Some women sabotaged factory production. A single loose screw, a faulty stitch, a missing bolt. Tiny acts that slowed the Nazi war machine. Each gesture was a whisper of resistance in a place built to silence every voice. Others documented everything they could. They hid scraps of paper under floorboards, inside bread, or in the hems of clothing, proof of the atrocities for the day when justice would come. Even the simplest act, a smile, a song, a shared crumb of bread, was rebellion. It meant, "You have not broken me." But as the war neared its end and Allied forces closed in, the Nazis prepared to erase every trace of their crimes, and for the women of Ravensbrück, the final days would become a new kind of nightmare. By early 1945, Ravensbrück was collapsing under the weight of its own horror. The war was lost, and the SS knew it. Orders came from Berlin: destroy evidence, erase witnesses, make Ravensbrück disappear. Transports rolled out day and night. Trains packed with women were sent eastward, many to Auschwitz, others to unknown destinations. Some never reached their destination. They died in sealed wagons before the journey's end. Inside the camp, chaos reigned. Food ran out. The crematorium burned without pause. Piles of bodies rose higher every day, the air thick with smoke and despair. Guards fled, new ones arrived. No one seemed to know who was in command anymore. But amidst the madness, some prisoners saw a glimmer of hope, the sound of distant artillery, the Red Army drawing closer. Each explosion felt like a heartbeat of freedom. Yet liberation would not come gently. In those final weeks, the Nazis unleashed one last wave of killings. Thousands were executed in panic, as if slaughter could erase guilt. Still, there were miracles. A few women managed to escape during the confusion. Others were saved through the efforts of the Swedish Red Cross, who arranged the white buses, convoys that carried hundreds of women out of the camp just days before the Soviets arrived. When the Red Army finally entered Ravensbrück in late April 1945, they found a vision of hell. Thousands of corpses and survivors so thin they looked almost transparent. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire that had preceded it. The war was over. But for the women who survived Ravensbrück, liberation was only the beginning of another struggle, the fight to be heard, believed, and remembered. When the gates of Ravensbrück finally opened, freedom did not feel like victory. It felt like waking from a nightmare, one too real to ever forget. The survivors stumbled into a world that could barely comprehend what they had endured. Many were too weak to walk, too traumatized to speak. Some returned home to find their families gone, their cities in ruins, their past lives erased, and yet they began to tell their stories. Slowly, painfully, they spoke about the cold, the hunger, the experiments, the beatings, the courage. They carried memories like open wounds, but also as weapons against silence. In the years that followed, the world learned what Ravensbrück truly was. Not just a camp, but a mirror of humanity's darkest side and of women's unbreakable strength. Sarah Helm, in If This Is a Woman, wrote, "Their struggle was not only to survive, but to remain human. Ravensbrück became a symbol, of endurance, of sisterhood, of resistance against a system designed to erase them. Today, the camp stands quiet. The lake still shimmers. Trees sway in the wind where once the barracks stood. But the silence carries echoes. The roll calls, the footsteps, the whispers of prayers in the night. The women of Ravensbrück did not vanish. Their voices live on, in diaries, in testimonies, in the memories they refused to let die. Ravensbrück was the only concentration camp built exclusively for women. Over 130,000 entered. Tens of thousands never returned. But the story of Ravensbrück is not only about death, it is about courage, about women who, even in a world built to destroy them, chose to help, to resist, to endure. If this story moved you, share it. Let their names be spoken, because remembering them is the truest act of defiance.